Is that something that you always wanted to be a priest? You know, my brother, I remember Keith. He wanted to be a farmer because he wanted to milk cows. I remember him telling me that when he was little. Well, he doesn't milk cows. He's an engineer. But for you, did you always have a desire to be a priest?
Well, it's funny you say that because I could say on the one hand, yes, I have always had a desire to be a priest because as far back as I can remember, or at least even my parents talk about the fact that since I was a very little boy, after Sunday Mass, I would say, I want to be a priest. And I do distinctly remember in our first house, so it was before I was 8 years old at least, I would go some Saturday mornings into the bathroom and I'd take an empty toilet paper roll and I'd cut a strip of it out and I'd attach it onto my shirt somehow with a paper clip or something, and I'd go into my parents' room where they'd still be in bed and I'd start to say Mass. And my mom was very kind and she'd play along, and I think my dad, he was exhausted from working all week. He probably just rolled over and pretended I wasn't there. But that's a sign of my understanding. It was a game to me. I wanted to be a priest, but I did not know what that meant. And so as I would say that more and more as a little boy, people would say, really, is that all you want to be? You just want to be a priest? And I'd say, no, I want to have a ranch, and I want to be a firefighter and have 12 kids. And everyone would laugh. Oh, well, you can't have any of those things if you become a priest. You can have all of those things but not become a priest, but it can't be the other way around. And I didn't understand why. And like I said, I was very little, maybe 5 or 6 years old. So as I continued to get older, and people explained more, the priest doesn't have a wife. The priest doesn't get married because he gives himself entirely to God. And he's always at the church. And so you can't have your own family and you don't get to do other work. You just have to work at the church. I finally understood and probably didn't want to do it, if I was honest. But then when I was about 9 years old, I was visiting my grandparents, or I was always at my grandparents' house, my mother's parents. They were Italian immigrants, my nonna and nonno. So I was over at nonna and nonno's house one day, and my nonno was showing me all of his little saint prayer cards. And he was telling me their stories, and he had them laid out on the coffee table. And I was obviously very enthralled by all of these stories. My other cousins say, they don't remember him ever doing anything like that with them. So he obviously saw something special in me that I would be interested in that. And then at some point he said, Cristi, come and sit with Nono on the couch. And so I jumped up on the couch with him. And he said, you know what? Our family is so big, but not the one a priest, not the one a nun. It's no good. I said, oh, sorry, Nono. That's okay, I have idea. Why don't you be priest? I said, me become a priest? Sure, you make such a nice priest. And I remember feeling so empowered because I was very close to my nonno. I idolized him. I wanted to be just like him. I followed him around everywhere. And now, even though I understood what you did not get to have if you were a priest, this very important person in my life just told me he thought I should be a priest. And so for me, that was enough. I said, okay, I will become a priest. And so I started saying that from, like I said, about the age 9 or 10. And I can say, sadly, at Catholic school, that didn't win you too many friends. If you started telling everyone you wanted to be a priest, it only just made the teachers love you. And then when the teachers love you, no one else loves you. So by the time I was finishing elementary school, some people were nice to me, but I wouldn't say that I had a ton of friends. I was picked on quite harshly over it. And so in Medicine Hat, where I grew up, there was only one junior high school. The little Catholic elementary schools all fed into this one junior high school. So I knew that if I moved to this new school, I would meet some new kids, and so I had a chance to make a fresh start. That no one had to ever know that I wanted to become a priest. So I decided to just keep that to myself. And one day, I'm sitting in class in my grade 7 homeroom, and there's these 3 girls that sat around me. These 3 pretty girls. I thought, oh, well, I'll just try and become friends with them. And they liked me, and they thought I was funny, and I did all my little impersonations of my grandfather or teachers or something. And so they just laughed and laughed all the time. And immediately I said, I don't know what I was ever thinking. There's no way I'm becoming a priest. I'm going to marry one of these girls. So I just needed to figure out which one. And over time, I narrowed it down, and I decided which of the ones I wanted to marry. And I had, like I said, never talked about the priesthood anymore. I just never brought it up. But I never abandoned my faith. I still went to Mass with my family. We still prayed. I still loved my faith, actually. But I think I kind of pulled it more within. I didn't want to be so obvious about it. But I did have lots of questions, especially in religion class. So I was that guy who asked a lot of questions. But everyone liked that guy in junior high school because it meant wasting time and not having to do work and not, right? So it wasn't causing me a problem anymore. But it was something of some tension within me. And then this one girl who I really liked, one day she asked me if I would like to go to the youth group. And I didn't know what the youth group was. I'd never heard of the youth group. And I got all awkward and didn't know if she was like testing me to see like, was I a church boy or something? And so I said, I guess I could maybe go and check it out sometime, but I don't know. Do you go to the youth group? And she said, well, yes, that's why I'm inviting you to come to the youth group. I thought, oh, okay, well, if you go, then sure, I'd like to come to the youth group. So I told my parents that this Saturday I have to go to the youth group. And my dad said, no, we go to Mass on Sunday at noon. We're not going to Saturday night Mass. And I was begging, please, I have to go to this youth group. And my mother, in her wisdom, was like, our son would like to go to church. We're not going to fight about this. So I got to go on Saturday night on the condition that I would still go at noon on Sunday with my family. I said, yes, of course, fine, I don't care. So I went to youth group and had the time of my life. It was amazing to see other kids from my school that I never would have guessed. And we just had fun. And we prayed together and we ate. And our priest came just to say hi. And I'd never had what felt like such an informal interaction with him. Because even when the priest would come to our house to visit our family for dinner, it was a big family gathering. So I never interacted with him. But here he was in the room with us. And I just remember feeling so special and so I loved being at church and I loved being there with that girl. So I had this tug of war going on in my heart until one day I was walking down the hallway in grade 9 and my math teacher just appeared out of nowhere. And he was a very intimidating man. He stood 6.5 feet tall, big broad shoulders, a full head of white hair, except for this little yellow curl that he got from smoking a pipe. At recess, he used to walk up and down the school field smoking his pipe, just staring at us. So we were all afraid of him. And so Mr. Cullen steps out in the hallway, steps in front of me, and he was the only teacher in the school who called me Cristino. I went by Chris. I never went by Cristino growing up. But he insisted that was the name on my attendance form, so that's what he called me. He said, Cristino, I think you should consider the priesthood. Out of the blue, just like I had no idea why he said that, where that came from. He was my math teacher, of all things. And then another teacher was passing by, and he said, Dr. Glashan, don't you agree Cristino would make a fine priest? And he said, oh yes, I've always thought that about him. And now I was shocked. I didn't know what to say. Then I thought, one of my enemies from elementary school is spreading rumors about me because he probably wants to date the girl that I'm after. And so he's telling everybody that I used to say I wanted to be a priest or something. I don't know. I got all paranoid. But nothing happened. That was it. He said it that one day. No one ever brought it up again. None of my classmates brought it up. It's not like the word was out that Chris wants to be a priest. But now I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was constantly on my mind. And now I was becoming very involved at church, more involved in the youth group. My pastor seemed like he was sort of taking me under his wing, and he gave me a key to the sacristy and said, you can help me get set up for Mass on Saturday afternoons. And so I couldn't make sense of what was happening in me. I knew I still really liked this girl and I wanted to be married, but now I could not stop thinking about the priesthood. And this went on for a whole year until the following summer, when it was going to be World Youth Day in Toronto. And Pope John Paul was coming, so we were all very excited for that, of course. And we had a retreat before that. Actually, sorry, I got ahead of myself. We had a retreat the year before World Youth Day. So I'd been thinking about this for a year. Then we went on this retreat, and I finally opened up to my best friend that I think God might be calling me to become a priest. And his eyes got all wide, and he said, "You too?" And I guess he had also been thinking about it. And so now we shared that together, and we went through that whole year secretly talking about this with each other. I didn't have a computer or internet at home. I couldn't research it. I wrote letters to different places where you could get information sent back to you. But that was the extent of figuring out whether or not I should do this. And then Pope John Paul came to Canada for World Youth Day. And in the days of the diocese leading up to that in Calgary, we had an ordination of 4 men, but because there were so many thousands of extra pilgrims, we had it in our football stadium at McMahon Stadium. And there were probably 5,000 or 6,000 people at it. And when those 4 men were laying flat on the field, like prostrate as we do during an ordination, my heart just started racing. And I looked at that and I said, "Lord, is that what you're asking me to do? To lay down my life like that?" And my buddy who was sitting right beside me, he could probably see the look on my face, and he said, "You know what, if God wants us to be priests, let's just ask for a sign." And I thought, that's perfect, because I've asked God for signs before and I've never got one. So I'll ask him for a sign, and then I won't get one, and then it won't be my fault that I don't become a priest. So I thought I had it all figured out.
You're so methodical.
Exactly. So I said that little prayer in the silence of my heart. "Lord, if you want me to be a priest, give me a sign." And I am not kidding you. The instant I said that prayer in my heart, I was tapped on my shoulder. And I turned around, and there was this little old Chinese woman standing behind me. And she just looked at me and said, "You are going to become a priest." And I froze, and my buddy was like, "Whoa, that's your sign, man. She said that to you." And I was speechless. And then she asked me, "Are you going to become a priest?" And I just didn't know what to say. And so she asked my name, and I stammered out, "Chris." She said, "Well, Chris, I'm going to pray for you every day until your ordination to the priesthood." Now, I didn't want to accept that. I said, "Well, maybe it was a coincidence. How do I know if that was a sign? How does one know if that's ever a sign from God?" I'm very thick-headed. So fast forward a week, and now it's the closing Mass of World Youth Day. And during the Mass, Pope John Paul was already very frail. You were there, I'm sure, Ken. He was very frail already by then, and he kind of struggled to speak. But at a certain point, he pushed himself up on his elbows, and he said, "Perhaps some of you think you may be called to the priesthood or religious life. To you I say, do not be afraid to follow Christ on the royal road of the cross." And when I heard the Holy Father say that, it was like a wave crashed over me. I was covered from head to toe in goosebumps. And I just knew that I couldn't be afraid of this. If this was what God was calling me to, I couldn't be afraid. So I made a deal with God that I would go to the seminary. I still hadn't graduated from high school. So I said, as soon as I graduate, I will go straight to the seminary for 1 year, just to give it a try. And then we'll both see that this isn't for me, and then I can carry on with my life. So I went right after high school. And 1 year turned into 2 years, and then 2 years turned into 3 years. And then before you know it, 8 years passed, and that was me laying down on the floor being ordained. And I give thanks to God every day for the gift of this beautiful vocation and the amazing ways He just sort of gently led me to it.
Wow. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing. When I think about your story, now you're a priest. Now are you vocations director in your diocese?
Director, yeah.
So when a young man, or you're speaking to young men about the priesthood, is there a list or things that a young man should consider to begin to recognize God's call in their life to the priesthood? Because it's not a job. It's God called you to this. It's not like, oh, I'm going to be an engineer, or I'm going to be a lawyer, or I might be a priest. This is truly a call, a vocation that God has for somebody. So when a young man is trying to figure out, what is God's call in my life? Should he be relying solely on the signs of the lady tapping him on the shoulder? Or what if he asks for a sign, he doesn't get that? Well then, therefore I must not be a priest? Mm-hmm. Or is there a list of things that you would ask young men to consider and say, hey, if these things are happening in your life, perhaps the Lord is calling you to the priesthood?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And as I point out in my story, that tap on the shoulder wasn't enough to convince me. I still needed more. So waiting for a big extraordinary sign is never the answer, because we will find some way to explain it away and to say, no, this isn't, I can't assume that that's what this is about. Instead, what we need to ask is, what draws my heart? When do I feel peace? When do I feel the presence of God? When do I sense satisfaction in my life? And when I see young men who love the Lord, are trying to grow in their spiritual life, who love being around me or being around church, who want to serve Mass, who love beautiful things done for God or for the liturgy, when I see that there's all of this fervor, and then you bring up the priesthood and they say, oh, no, Father, no, I'm not thinking about the priesthood. I always say, that's fine, but should you be? If it hasn't occurred to you yet, should you ask the Lord, are you calling me to the priesthood, Lord? And if you're afraid to ask that question, that means you're afraid the answer might be yes. So you'd rather not ask, because then you don't want to have to hear it. I sometimes when I'm speaking to a large group, or I've done this before and I'm preaching a homily, I talk about the fact that I keep a list of young men who I pray for on a regular basis, who I have talked to implicitly or explicitly about their vocational discernment. But I don't tell anyone who's on that list. Only me. I'm the only person. Even the bishop doesn't know who's on that list. And when I talk about the list, I say, if listening to me talk about this list has made you nervous and uncomfortable, and you've wondered if you're on it, or you're afraid that you are, or you hope that you are, then that means the Lord is asking you to think about this more carefully. He is beginning to sow the seeds, because there are many other guys who would laugh and be like, haha, Father's list. I bet he's on that list. I bet he's on that list. Because it wouldn't even occur to them to think about the priesthood. But if it occurs to you to think about the priesthood, then that's the sign that you need to.
A young man might be sitting, thinking, watching this, and then they look at the priesthood, and the first thing that comes to their mind might be, oh, look at all that I have to give up. Mm-hmm. How can one be happy giving up a wife, children, intimacy with a spouse? And so they, well, I want all that, therefore I couldn't be happy being a priest. Mm-hmm.
I know
Your
how that
response.
feels. I used to say the same thing. But Pope Benedict, when he was elected, in his homily at the inauguration of his pontificate, said that when we let Christ into our lives, he takes away nothing, nothing, absolutely nothing of all that makes life beautiful and great. And instead, he gives us everything in return. And I can just tell you that the priesthood takes nothing from you. It asks you to give him everything. And if you give it, it hasn't been taken. But when you give it, you get back immeasurably more than you ever could have imagined possible.